Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Falag, and let me present in brief the task that you need to do this week, week 10. I am in the Canvas course 098, and I'm looking at the week 10 module. So let me start with the overview page. As I mentioned in my email to you this coming week, we will not have a class because I'll be at the TESOL convention in Seattle. It's a great chance for me to learn more from others and share what I have experienced about hybrid courses. So, you're on your own this week, but it's a pretty light week, you'll see. Here are your objectives and tasks for the week. You should be reading Chapter 8 of The Other Wes Moore. This is the last chapter that you will need to read. There is an epilogue, sort of a closing chapter, but you don't need to read that one. There is another short reading called Are Fathers Necessary? Please read this one in preparation for Essay 4. There's a short writing assignment, as usual, on Chapter 8 of The Other Wes Moore. And the two main things that we're going to work on this week are introductory paragraph, passive and active verbs, and another one I have to add on to this list is revising and editing strategies. So let me walk you through the tasks. I'm hitting the next button on each page. Here's the reading assignments. There's the link to the reading. It's a pretty short reading about fathers. Okay, so first let's talk about introduction paragraphs. I've heard many of you say in class, my introduction needs to have a hook, and that's one of the three elements that make a good introduction. So you can think of the other two parts as the bridge and the thesis. So the hook is something that gets your attention. The bridge are the sentences that start to narrow the focus of the attention, and then leading into the thesis, the sentence that expresses your opinion about the topic. You'll see on this page that there is a link to a web guide that talks about these three main parts of the introduction. And there's also a short PowerPoint presentation. I have made a screen shot of one page from this PowerPoint that gives examples of different kinds of hooks, which I think is worth looking at. So read these, please, and you'll see that there are many interesting ways to start out an introduction. I remember a few weeks ago when you said in one of your discussions, starting an essay for some of you is the hardest part. So this will give you some ideas about how to do that. Then to practice, I want you to do this at home before we meet again, and then we'll talk about it when we next have our next class. Here are two sample introductions, and I want you to read both of them and just write down on a piece of paper where you think the three main parts are, the hook, the bridge, and the thesis in each of these versions of the introduction. Also, identify what kind of hook the writer is using in each version, and you can go back and look at this list of different kinds of hooks. Then finally, I want you to tell me which one you like the best and be prepared to explain why. Okay? So I want you to think more about introduction paragraphs and gather some ideas about how to make your introduction more effective. All right, the next activity is about revising and editing. So I know that many of you have very busy lives, and I get the feeling sometimes that when you turn in your essays especially, you've just dashed them out and maybe not taken the time to read over them before submitting them. This is not the thing to do. Take a little time to revise and edit. And revising means changing ideas. Reading your paper over for ideas, and either rewriting the ideas or adding ideas, maybe reorganizing. Editing, on the other hand, means language, correcting language or changing language. So, I know this is not easy to do, but here are some steps that many writers have used effectively. First of all, like I said, you have to read over a piece of writing before you hand it in. Just do it. Just leave a little extra time. Find some time to do it. And the way to do this, I've found, is to write something and then leave it on the desk or on your computer. Go off and do something else, and then come back and read it over again. Don't try to read over your writing right after you've just finished it. Okay, even 15 minutes will give you kind of a new perspective on what you've written. And the third suggestion here is a really good one, I think. Read the draft slowly and read what you actually see. Otherwise, you're likely to read what you intended to write but did not. I think really this might apply more to editing for language errors than revising, but it could fit in both ways of rethinking your paper. Next, if you can find somebody to read over your work, this is a great way to revise and edit. And finally, on the web, you can find lots of revising checklists. Okay, and I put one here below. As far as editing goes, we've talked about this in class, that you need to start to identify what your most common errors are. Look back at papers that I have turned back to you and marked, and you'll see you probably are making the same kinds of mistakes over and over again. Verb tenses, verb endings, missing articles, capitalization, run-on sentences. There are lots of different kinds of errors. Find the ones that you are most commonly making. Then, when you're reading over your new paper, look particularly to find those kinds of errors. And some researchers have found that if students read their papers aloud, this may help them to find errors, like, inconsistent verb tenses, not keeping the past tense, for example, or maybe missing words in a sentence. Okay? And then finally, like I said, there are lots of checklists that you can find on the web. So I started out with one that I found from a college in Ohio called Defiance College, and then I added some things and rewrote some of their points, but some of the ideas come from Defiance College. So there are two lists here. The first one is about revising. And so read over these questions in the area of the introduction, your thesis, and then the organization of your paper, the content of ideas in body paragraphs. So far this semester we haven't talked at all about conclusion paragraphs, but I promise we're going to get to that. And then finally, here's another editing checklist, okay? And so this checklist is a series of questions that ask you to think about sentences, about errors, about vocabulary, about spelling. So what I would like you to do is try to practice this. Find somebody to work with who will read over a sample of your writing and then go through these checklists and try to help you revise and edit. And we'll practice this in class too. All right, so the last big topic for this week is passive and active verbs. And so I want you to read over this little lesson here in session in week 10. We've talked a bit about this in class. You know that most sentences in English use active verbs, and these verbs are called active because the subject of the sentence is the one that's doing the action. Whereas in passive verb sentences, the subject is receiving the action. Okay? So, take a look at a couple of examples. Look at the first one. The Pennsylvania Lottery sold its first tickets on March 7th, 1972. The subject is Pennsylvania Lottery, and the verb is active. So the lottery did the action. Well, it was actually the Lottery Commission did the action of selling the first ticket. So that's an active verb sentence. Now look at the equivalent sort of under passive verbs. The lottery was created by the Pennsylvania General Assembly in 1971. So here, the lottery did not create itself. It was the Pennsylvania General Assembly. That's like the House of Representatives in Congress. That's the group that created the lottery. So if you look further on this page, you will see examples of active verb sentences and passive verb sentences in lots of different verb tenses. And I have not included all the verb tenses because these are the ones that we most commonly use. Okay? So I want you to read those, and also to remember that we use passive verbs when we show location or the state of something, the condition of something. So for example, location. Pennsylvania is bordered by 5 states: New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Ohio, and New York. And describing the condition of something, if you've ever been to Pennypack Park, just look down on the ground and you'll see that the park is covered with mica. That's the black rock that has shiny flakes in it. So in both of these example sentences, you have passive verbs. Okay? Is bordered, is covered. Okay? And we've talked before about prepositions. So these two verbs are followed by a preposition. Covered with, bordered by. Okay? So passive verbs are really hard. I know that. So I have some online practice exercises for you to do. And then when next we meet, we'll practice this together. Okay? And then we'll get to week 11. So thank you for listening. I know this video was kind of long, but I will see you next week.